I'm so upset. Oh my God.
Let's see how Earth responds to that.
Turks, Jake Ugranic Kasparian with you guys, not from the Polymarket Studios in LA, and we'll likely be there again tomorrow. But lots of interesting stories today, as usual. Elon Musk trying to interfere in not just our government, but many other governments. That's a super interesting story. And speaking of government turnovers, down goes Trudeau. Down goes Trudeau. Well, we're gonna get to that in a second. So lots of amazing stories for you guys. Let's get started. Casper, what do you have for us?
Well, let's start with what you know about Trudeau, and that is the fact that he has decided to resign. Here it is.
Despite best efforts to work through it, Parliament has been paralyzed for months after what has been the longest session of a minority parliament in Canadian history. That's why this morning I advised the Governor General that we need a new session of Parliament. I intend to resign as party leader, as Prime Minister, after the party selects its next leader through a robust, nationwide, competitive process.
As you just heard, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has decided to resign from Parliament, and he didn't make that decision alone. In fact, there's been growing pressure from within his own Liberal Party for him to step down. Now, just to give you a sense of Trudeau's lack of popularity, Newsweek notes that President-elect Donald Trump's favorability is double that of Justin Trudeau's, and momentum in support for his exit began to grow following the resignation of his finance minister, Chrystia Freeland, on December 16th. Now, what's interesting about that story is that she actually criticized Trudeau's policy plans in her resignation letter, which ended up becoming public. And the other thing that's really fascinating is prior to her public resignation, there was a Zoom call in which he said that he intended to basically oust her from her position. So she resigned right before she was set to deliver a major address on the state of the nation's finances. And to be sure, the economic conditions for working class people in Canada is a main reason why there's been discontent in the country in regard to Trudeau's leadership. So we'll get to those details in just a minute. Now, prior to her resignation, again, Trudeau told her that he planned to remove her from her post during a Zoom call. And the details of that ended up going public. And he told her that he planned to fire her even though he had no replacement in mind. Now, the higher cost of living in Canada has become a huge issue. In fact, if you look at what the people of Canada have been complaining about, there are a lot of parallels between Canada and the United States, especially when it comes to issues like housing affordability, inflation, and even immigration. And so in addition to that, according to Charlton University professor Fen Hampson, Fen says that the second major factor was the increase in immigration as the Trudeau government sought to boost the number of migrants in an attempt to lower Canada's median age. That wasn't the only reason why they kind of opened up the country to more immigration following the COVID-19 pandemic. Much like the United States, there was a labor shortage. There were shutdowns. Those shutdowns led to disruptions in companies, in the employment within those companies. And when things started to open up again, well, some people had moved on to different fields of work. And so a labor shortage was a problem. And so they opened up the country and allowed more immigrants in as a result of that. But even Trudeau himself is now arguing that they went a little too far. I'll give you some details on that in just a moment. But others are also arguing that Trudeau's so-called wokeness is what destroyed support toward his leadership. That includes Stephen Marsh, who's a Toronto-based author who covers Justin Trudeau for several publications here in the United States. He says that, quote, "I know the term is very loaded, but he was Captain Woke, and the world has really, really turned against wokeness in a very, very deep way." Another individual who is dead set on pinpointing this issue and his ouster to wokeness is Piers Morgan. Here he is on his own show this morning.
Justin Trudeau was about as woke as you could possibly get. I think we got a clip of him where a student tries to use the word mankind and Trudeau interrupts. Let's take a look.
Unfortunately, in Canada, our volunteering as a charitable religious organization is extremely difficult. Extremely. That's why, in actuality, we cannot do free volunteering to help our neighbors in need as we truly desire. So that's why we came here today to ask you to also look into the policies that religious charitable organizations have in our legislation so that it can also be changed, because maternal love is the love that's going to change the future of mankind. So we'd like you to look into
we
that.
like to say people kind, not necessarily mankind.
The last thing I want to learn is that we can't use mankind.
But on that very same panel, Batya Ungar-Sargon, I think, made a really great point about what's really front and center of the disapproval rating that the Canadian people have given to Justin Trudeau and his leadership. Take a look.
I am a little bit of a woke analysis skeptic here. I think we are in a populist moment, like Shank said, where left and right are coming together. This moment is the working class versus the elites. And the working class, yeah, they don't like the wokeness, but they don't vote on that stuff. They are voting on their pocketbooks. They are voting on immigration, which, if you are working class, is an economic issue. This is what I learned when I traveled the country for a year interviewing working class people for my book, Second Class, How the Elites Betrayed America's Working Men and Women. I found that people did have conservative views on woke issues, but much more important to them were, first of all, a very tolerant view when it came to racial issues, when it came to gay issues. They didn't want to see intolerance. They didn't support abortion bans, even when they themselves were pro-life. But also, immigration and economics were one and the same thing, and that's what you're seeing here. To me, Trudeau is being punished now for his COVID overreach, for his liberal authoritarianism that really hurt working class people.
And that panel, did have a really interesting discussion on this issue. Vinny jumped in with some good points as well, but so did you, Cenk. You made a point about how there was really this revolt against incumbents during this, past year. Even if you're talking about, more conservative or right-wing leaders, in those cases, the people of their country, revolted against them. It was almost like this populist uprising that we've seen across the country. But I'm curious what you think about the woke versus economic frustration argument. I mean, I don't know why it can't just be both, but that's my take on it. But what do you think?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure that it's both, and I'm sure that one is more important than the other. But what I found most interesting about that panel on Piers this morning, oftentimes when we show our prediction clips or past clips, there's a game where people go, "Oh, hey, Cenk's wearing the same outfit." Well, this one is because that was today, right? And today on that panel, what I saw was a blurring of all political lines. You couldn't tell who was left and who was right. We almost all agreed that the number one issue is economics and populism. And Batya and I have engaged in giant debates in the past, but I think that Piers thought that she was a left winger when she's not. But you really couldn't tell, because the core of this issue is not our disagreement about things that are woke or not woke, right? The core is our agreement that the people are not being served, whether it's in Canada or in America. Canada had a bigger inflation problem than we did. Trudeau bungled a lot of things politically to the point that you mentioned in the beginning, Anna. So Freeland, the finance minister, he was going to fire her, and he told her that in that Zoom call that you referred to, but he didn't have a backup plan yet So she just jumped out and resigned before he could fire her publicly and blamed it on him. I mean, that is classic bungling from a political perspective. And so he had a good run because Canadians are generally very progressive, especially compared to Americans, right? So I think that's why the woke argument in Canada works even less. And so are some people annoyed by saying people kind instead of mankind? For sure, right? Look, honestly, I'm a little annoyed by it. And it's not because like I think, oh, men should be in charge and we should always be. No, it's just a word that people use. Of course they mean all humanity, right? So I can see how that would get under some people's skin, but it's mainly conservatives that it bothers. Mainly they were gonna be against Trudeau anyway. And here in America, as Bhatia pointed out, that still was not close to the largest issue. The largest issue is always economics. Why? Because it affects people's lives so much more than any other issue. And in that government, they didn't do a great job of handling it either. And one last thing, Anna, that's so important to this context, and as you pointed out, the main point that I made is, it's not about left or right. You could show, and as we've done on the Young Turks here over and over again, voters internationally choosing left instead of right. And in fact, they chose Biden instead of Trump, even though Biden certainly doesn't look like change, right? Back in 2020. And that's because they're constantly voting out incumbents because they hate this neoliberal system that we're all living under all across the world.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. And what I thought was really interesting were the parallels between the frustrations that Americans have been voicing and the frustrations that Canadians are voicing. Now, look, I'm not gonna pretend like there isn't a component of, and I don't think that it represents most people who have been speaking out against the migration crisis, but unfortunately, there is a small percentage of people who say gross, hateful, nefarious things about migrants. But I think the vast majority of people in the United States who are concerned about the migrant crisis are concerned about, the fact that we don't have finite resources. And even HUD under the Biden administration came out with their report indicating that what exacerbated homelessness between 2023 and 2024 was the influx of migrants coming into the country at a time when we have low stock of housing available. And something very similar is happening in Canada as well. So based on some of their reporting, government reports, in fact, there is a shortage of housing. So let's talk a little bit about how many migrants have come in and what the shortage of housing looks like. So the number of international students, for instance, grew 30% from 2022 to 2023, according to the Canadian Bureau for International Education. Meanwhile, government data shows that the number of temporary foreign workers in Canada has doubled in the last 5 years. And so as the economy was kind of stabilizing and as more, Canadian citizens were looking for work, they were running into similar issues as the one that's currently being debated in regard to H-1B visas here in the United States. And so Justin Trudeau himself just 2 days ago put out a video confessing that they went a little too far in opening up the country to immigration. And he says that now they're implementing new restrictions when it comes to its so-called express entry program for high-skilled immigrants. And they're also trying to decrease the number of permanent immigrants coming into the country as well. So permanent immigration has also grown in the country, as you can imagine. Trudeau and Immigration Minister Mark Miller presented their most stringent immigration cutbacks yet, which would amount to a 21% reduction of permanent residents accepted into the country this year in 2025. And in regard to the housing shortage, it is pretty severe in Canada, much like here in the United States. Home prices have ballooned a whopping 30% in Canada since 2020. And according to a report by the Parliamentary Budget Officer, PBO, Canada needs an additional 3.1 million homes by 2030 in order to address the current housing crisis. We need 3 to 4 million homes right now, not by 2030, literally right now. So the problem is more pronounced here in the United States, but nonetheless, it's still an issue in Canada. So any comment on that before I talk a little bit about what's gonna happen next, politically speaking, in Canada?
Yeah, I do want to give voice to some of our members talking about what's next and Biden in a second too. But yeah, on this, Anna, look, I think woke and immigration are actually similar in a way that people don't realize. Because I think the underlying issue is for some people, they're really discomforted by change. So when they see the demographics of their country changing, they're bothered by it. When they see words changing, they're bothered by it. And as I've explained before, I understand I'm a super nostalgic guy and I'm conservative by nature, but not in politics. So I get that being discomforted. And so that's partly what happened in Canada and here in the US. But again, all of that is, and by the way, I'm not justifying it. I'm an immigrant. I changed the demographics of this country, and I think immigrants greatly improve both countries. But I'm just explaining why it happens, right? But again, it pales in comparison to housing prices and inflation overall. Those are gigantic issues. As James Carville pointed out in a New York Times op-ed he did a couple of days ago. And it was great to see because he's, in a lot of ways as establishment as it gets, having worked with Bill Clinton, et cetera. He said, we got to go to populism and we got to go back to what we focused on in the first Clinton campaign, which is it's the economy, stupid. Because, and this is a great point that he made that I wanted to emphasize. He said, an average person has 3 to 5 interactions at least a day with the economy. When they go to buy milk, when they go to pay their rent, when they go to buy gas, et cetera, et cetera. So that is the thing that is most relevant in their lives over and over again on a daily basis. Whereas foreign policy is abstract, even things like being woke, et cetera, is less of an issue because they interact with it less, right? Although it might go to core identity issues, et cetera. So it's the focus on the economy is always got to be paramount. But Anna, that leads to the number one problem that you and I talk about all the time on the show, which is that for the political class, they're so obsessed with the donors and with a neoliberal way of thinking that they can't do the populist policies that the citizens are in favor of because they're blocked by the elites. So they're in this constant friction of serving the elites who got them into power versus serving the voters. They almost always choose the elites, and that's why the voters are throwing out all of the incumbents, whether they're on the left or the right.
So let's move on to what happens next with the political system in Canada. So he's not going to resign right away. It doesn't work exactly like that. So here's what we do know. So Trudeau, basically the Liberal Party, since Trudeau is stepping down from his leadership role as prime minister, the Liberal Party, the party that he is from, will now engage in that robust competitive process to find the new leader of the party. And then that individual will face off with the individual from the Conservative Party, who actually at the moment has a massive lead over Justin Trudeau. So I guess the thinking is maybe the Liberal Party can find a leader that has a little more favorability with the Canadian people. So it could actually be a competitive race between whoever that person ends up being and the leader for the Conservative Party. Also, in a move that gives Liberals more time to settle on a new candidate, Justin Trudeau said Governor General Mary Simon granted his request to prorogue Parliament, placing it out of session until March 24th. So what does that mean? Prorogation effectively allows the prime minister to hit pause on Parliament. The government remains in power, but all parliamentary activity from existing bills and committee work to studies and investigations come to a halt. But 2025 was poised to be an election year anyway. Trudeau and the Liberals had been on track to remain in power until this year, until a deal struck in 2022 with the leftist opposition, the New Democratic Party. And Canada's general election was initially set to take place in October of this year. Now it's more likely to happen in the spring of this year.
Yeah, so one of our members on Twitch, Jonathan Hahn, wrote in, Trudeau's doing what Biden should have done. And another member on tyt.com, Dirge, wrote in, unlike Biden, Trudeau knows when he is unpopular. Look, that's relevant, and thank you for writing in, and become a member by hitting the join button below if you're watching on YouTube, or if you want to get all your content on tyt.com, that's a great place to sign up. So he's giving time for his own party to find someone else, and he's not even 98 or however old Biden is, right? He's only 53, but he's so unpopular, he realizes he can't come back from those numbers. And if you remember, when I started doing the petition like 15 months ago to drive Biden out, age was a huge factor in it, but his popularity was an even bigger factor. That was the number one factor. I kept talking about how if your numbers are in the 30s as an incumbent, you have no chance of winning. And Trudeau realized that, unlike Joe Biden. So he's doing the selfless thing here, which honestly, you have to give him some degree of credit for, because politicians almost never do that. And usually, especially in our country, and usually he'll think, oh, I've got a year to take it from, to double my numbers, triple my numbers. Joe Biden would have never done that. He didn't do that, and he didn't do it, and he was in much worse shape than Trudeau. He didn't do it until the last possible second, and it hurt his party and his country greatly. So at least Trudeau is doing something patriotic here and right for his party by saying, hey, let's figure out who can lead here and who could actually beat the other side, and let's give them an opportunity to do that. So he's not taking any rash actions and stepping down now and leaving his party in the lurch. So I appreciate that. So because guys, electing we're talking about how everybody's throwing out incumbents, and I understand that urge completely. And in primaries, by the way, you should definitely do that with almost everyone who's a Democrat or Republican, almost everyone. But when it comes to the general election, it doesn't necessarily solve anything, because if you just put in a conservative who's even more in favor of the donor class or the wealthy or the elites, that's not really gonna help you. So I hope that the liberals in Canada find a strong populist leader who's gonna drive towards positive change for the actual citizens of Canada, and they'll be far better off going in that direction.
All right, when we come back from the break, we'll take a trip back to the United States, where we'll dive into an interview that Secretary of State Antony Blinken had, in which he really reveals how delusional he is in regard to the Biden administration's foreign policy, especially in regard to Israel. We'll be right back.
All right, back on TYT. Let's start with Super Chat. Mark Moore wrote in, a lot of folks writing in from Canada today. Democracy alive and well here in Canada. January 6th, indeed. Power move, Americans take note. Yeah, that's how you do a democratic change. So I agree with you, Mark. Thanks for writing in. That's a good point. On YouTube memberships, Wang King wrote in, it's so Trudeau-ver. That's a dad joke after my own heart. Although we in the old days might say Schwang Wang Wang King. But love it, brother. All right, let's go to Twitch. Velvet Goldmine says, it drives me crazy that people still constantly say man or mankind. It's so easy to say people or humankind. It's the 21st century, come on. I hear you, and I know people on both sides of that. They get annoyed at people basically not using proper grammar and just saying man instead of people overall, and then people like me who are like, come on, let us go with the older words. So my suggestion is, don't judge people too harshly if they still use the old school words. Like I call people guys all the time, okay? But at the same time, let's try to go in the right direction, right? So for those of us who are the boomers who stick with some of the older words, let's try to get into better usage. And let's try not to judge each other too much. But it's a good point, Velvet Goldmine. I totally get what you're saying. Amanda Lorian 84 says, people are realizing these neoliberals are just pro-business leaders in designer clothing. I think that's 1,000,000,000% right. And so that's why neoliberals in the Democratic Party never made any sense. It was an oxymoron until, of course, they took over the Democratic Party, and now it's a party of corporate rule. And don't get me wrong, so are the Republicans. Salvi Dragon says, what the heck is even left or right anymore? The right says less government in your business unless it's your personal business. That's so true, right? Of course, small government, unless it's abortion, then I want to get between you and your doctor and you and your uterus, etc. And they continue, the left is the party of the people until the money gets waved in front of your face, then you don't matter. So miss me with the left versus right, because none of them represent what they say they represent. Salvi Dragon, I mean, you speak for all of us. That I think that is so enormously right in this case. Helen 007 says, I now ignore anyone that blames things on woke. As a Canadian, I'm glad we were kept as safe as possible during that time. As we got new info, things changed science. That's referring to COVID. The conservative leader is a doofus who has a hard on for Trump. As someone who had a child with severe disabilities, conservatives freeze/gut funding social programs when they get in. No thanks. It's not great with the liberals, but they at least support those programs. Helen, I agree with you, and I especially agree with you more in Canada, because in Canada you have less of a donor class problem. They still have folks representing the elites, but not as much as here in America. So your social programs are more likely to be protected by the left than they are here in the US. So that's very true. And then on COVID, I couldn't agree with you more. Some things changed and we got some things wrong, but that's called science. So tons of agreement there. Art Guy says he goes by many names: Chank, Shank, Jenks, Senk. But to us, he'll always be the people's elbow. And guys, that goes towards my, like when I ask you to be understanding of me saying, hey guys, or mankind, etc. I'm super understanding when people say Shank or Jank or Jenks. I don't care at all. They're trying to do the right thing. I'm not gonna judge them for a super difficult name. But yes, the correct pronunciation is Jank, like short for Jenkins, but we love them all. We'll be back. All right, back on TYT, Cenk and Anna with you guys. Also, Don Whitehead and Chaplain Fred, who both gifted 5 Young Turks memberships. Way to start out the year right. We appreciate you guys. All right, Casper, what's next?
We got to talk about this interview with Secretary of State Antony Blinken, because it was a disaster.
Fundamentally, look, one of the things that I found a little astounding throughout is that for all of the understandable criticism of the way Israel has conducted itself in Gaza, you hear virtually nothing from anyone since October 7th about Hamas. Why there hasn't been a unanimous chorus around the world for Hamas to put down its weapons, to give up the hostages, to surrender, I don't know what the answer is to that.
That's news to me, because all you'll hear from anyone with even a little bit of power in the United States, whether they're in the media or in government, is that we should condemn Hamas. And that is the immediate deflection as soon as anyone questions the conduct of the Israeli government and the Israeli Defense Forces. Now, with that in mind, outgoing Secretary of State, I just said that out loud for the first time and it felt real good. But outgoing Secretary of State Antony Blinken sat down with the New York Times to discuss the Biden administration's legacy. So this should be fun. And you won't be surprised to hear that he refuses to accept any responsibility for any of the bad decisions that the Biden administration might have made foreign policy-wise, especially as it pertains to Israel and how they've carried out their brutal war on Gaza. Now, when the host, Lulu Garcia-Navarro, asked Antony Blinken about Israel's conduct and the high death toll among women, children, elderly people, and other civilians in Gaza, Blinken repeatedly dodged the question.
Israel's response has been extreme. The latest UN figures put the Palestinian death toll at 45,000. Over 90% of Gaza's population is now displaced. The population is starving. All hospitals have been destroyed. In November, a UN committee released a report that found Israel's warfare practices, quote, consistent with the characteristics of genocide. I know you don't agree with that estimation, but do you believe that Israel's actions have been consistent with the rules of war?
Let's step back for a second and think about where we were on October 6th, and then where we were on October 7th, and where we've been since then.
Yeah, we've been thinking about that a lot, actually. And he could just continue skirting the question, just continue. So he says that the United States had 3 goals. Number 1, making sure an October 7th style attack never happens again. Number 2, stopping the war from expanding to other fronts, which obviously the United States has utterly failed at. and then making sure the women, children, and men of Gaza who had nothing to do with the attack were as protected as possible. Another massive failure given the high death toll among civilians. So Lulu Garcia Navarro tries again to get him to answer whether Israel has violated any human rights laws, any laws as it pertains to international war crimes. Let's see how he answers this time.
I mean, even Israel's former Israeli Defense Minister Moshe Elon referred to what's happening in Gaza as war crimes and ethnic cleansing. I mean, this is internal criticism. This is not external. So I guess I would repeat the question and ask you, has Israel respected the rules of war in Gaza?
We, as you know, have looked and continue to look at that in depth, and we put out our own reports on this with our own assessments. And when it comes to the actions that Israel has taken in its defense, in its just defense, in trying to make sure that October 7th never happens again, we've said from day one that how Israel does that matters. And throughout, starting on day one, we've tried to ensure that people had what they needed to get by.
But later in the interview, he accidentally confesses that Israel's kind of stood in the way of getting the people of Gaza the humanitarian aid they need to survive. Let's just take a quick look at that, and I'll go to you, Cenk.
The very first trip that I made to Israel, 5 days after October 7th, I spent with my team 9 hours in the Kiryat, the IDF's headquarters in Tel Aviv, 6 stories underground with the Israeli government, including the prime minister, including arguing for hours on end about the basic proposition that the humanitarian assistance needed to get to Palestinians in Gaza. In public opinion, this wasn't just the prime minister or a given leader in Israel. This was an entire society that didn't want any assistance getting to a single Palestinian in Gaza. I argued that for 9 hours. President Biden was planning to come to Israel a few days later. And in the course of that argument, when I was getting resistance to the proposition of humanitarian assistance getting in, I told the prime minister, I'm going to call the president and tell him not to come if you don't allow this assistance to start flowing. And I called the president and to make sure that he agreed with that, and he fully did. Anyway, we got the agreement to begin assistance through Rafah.
So in other words, there are violations of human rights in the way Israel is prosecuting this war. I mean, he accidentally admitted it, but he admitted it. And by the way, I should note that the reporter presses him further, and he's quick to defend Israel, saying that their intentions were good, but at times the results have been insufficient. Cenk.
Yeah, look, we're gonna miss the Secretary of State for Israel, but don't worry, we're not gonna miss him for long, because Marco Rubio will be the next Secretary of State for Israel. These people are not our Secretary of State at all. Not 1%. He works for Israel. He might literally work for Israel. We'll get to that in a minute. But all of this is absurd, because look, sometimes I ask with politicians, are they really this stupid, or are they trying to deceive you? In the case of Blinken, we know he's not stupid. So when he says, well, how come nobody's talking about Hamas? He knows everybody's talking about Hamas, and he knows that that's a misdirection, because we're not giving Hamas $30 billion of our money. We're giving Israel $30 billion of our money. That's why the conversation is about Israel. So it's not like there's a shortage of people condemning Hamas across the world. Every government on earth has condemned Hamas. The United Nations has condemned Hamas. Everyone has condemned Hamas. And they killed 1,200 people. Israel has killed now 46,000 people, the great majority of which are civilians. And we helped finance their murder and slaughter of the Palestinian people. And Antony Blinken helped them to do that. He covered up for them in every instance. When she asked about it, he looks visibly uncomfortable. And then I knew what he was gonna say first in that second clip that we showed you. I knew first, we gotta talk about October 6th and October 7th. And then in every answer, October 7th, as if the conflict started on October 7th, as if the Israelis have not been brutally occupying the Palestinians for 57 years, as if their land grabs and their theft of nonstop of Arab land isn't the core cancer that's causing the problem. And then as if October 7th happened this October 7th, and still the war would have been way too long and disproportionate, but it happened last October 7th. So Israel has been slaughtering with our money, and we're about to send them more money, more weapons to slaughter more people. And here comes their Secretary of State pretending to be our Secretary of State, doing nonstop excuses and ass kissing for a foreign government that has destroyed not only their reputation, but our reputation. Antony Blinken is beloved in Washington because he's one of the elites that profit off of all of these wars, and it puts a pretty face and nice language to it and nonstop excuses and propaganda for a foreign government. But the reality is that they represent that government, not us. And I loathe these people. He's been a terrible Secretary of State, nothing but nonstop failure, a grotesque failure of a human being. And so now, but in Washington, oh my God, feted, roses thrown at his feet. Such an intelligent way to cover for Israelis' war crimes, and way to force the American citizens that don't have enough wages or healthcare, or by the way, any of the things that the Israelis have, force them to pay the Israelis for killing more Palestinians. That's all he's ever done. He'll go down in history as not a diplomat, but as a marketing executive for the state of Israel.
Well, I mean, that's essentially what he is, and we'll get to the details of that in just a minute. But in regard to funding and weaponry and military support for Israel, on their way out, Blinken and Joe Biden are hoping to give Israel one last gift in the form of yet another weapons package. Now, the reporting around this has been complete and utter dog crap, because to be honest, like, I want to know the details of what they're planning to do here. Is this a weapons package that they're expecting American citizens to bankroll on top of the on top of the $17.9 billion in military aid to Israel since October 7th? Is this going to be basically an approval for Israel to buy American-made weapons? But regardless of what those details are, the package is expected to be worth about $8 billion. Again, does this mean Israel is going to spend $8 billion of its own money to buy American-made weapons? Or is this additional funding that American taxpayers are going to be on the hook for? And so this new package does need to be approved by the US House and Senate Foreign Relations Committees. So we'll see how that develops. However, in this interview with the Times, Blinken was asked why the US is continuing to arm Israel, and here's what he had to say.
Hamas is no longer deemed a threat in the way that it was. And the population has been completely decimated. So I'm curious, why still provide these weapons to Israel?
First of all, we have been and we remain fundamentally committed to Israel's defense. And unfortunately, it faces adversaries and enemies from all directions. And that means that the support that the United States provides over many administrations, Republican and Democrat, over many years, that support is absolutely vital to making sure that Israel is able to defend itself, that it can deter aggression coming from many other quarters, whether it's Hezbollah, whether it's Iran, whether it's the many Iranian-backed proxies, whether it's the Houthis, you name it. That support is vital to making sure Israel has a deterrent, has an adequate defense, and in turn, that means that we're not going to have an even broader, wider conflict that results in more death.
I'm sure attempting to steal territory in Lebanon and Syria has nothing to do with the hostility that's been directed toward the government of Israel. But nonetheless, look, there's a huge conflict of interest here as it pertains to Antony Blinken. I raised this conflict of interest when Joe Biden tapped him to be in his administration as Secretary of State. And that has to do with the fact that Antony Blinken directly himself formed a consulting firm known as West Exec Advisors. And The Intercept had written about this. So let me just give you a few excerpts. Their focus has been to enhance the capabilities of defense, intelligence, and law enforcement agencies. Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, and more than a dozen other Biden officials also worked for this consulting firm before joining the Biden administration. But little is known about their client list, and that's because of how this consultant firm was structured, allowing them to essentially hide who their clients are. So the staffers are not considered lobbyists. And so as a result, they are not required to disclose who they work for. So if they're working for foreign governments, we wouldn't know that because they don't have to report it. Mandy Smithberger, who's a director of the Center for Defense Information at the Project on Government Oversight, told Politico a few years ago, by not directly advocating for federal dollars on behalf of West exec clients, they don't have to publicly divulge who is paying them and for what activities, such as the connections they make with government agencies. They avoid becoming registered lobbyists or foreign agents and are instead becoming strategic consultants, she said. However, we do know that Blinken advised companies like AT&T, FedEx, Facebook, Uber, and defense contractors like Boeing, which of course sells weapons to Israel. And additionally, West exec advised Windward, a digital surveillance company that was founded by Israeli intelligence officers and counts former Israeli army chief of staff, Gabi Ashkenazi, as a board member. So, I mean, if we actually had a government that served the best interests of the American people, we would not allow these types of conflicts of interest to stand, but nonetheless they do. And that's the result, and that is what results in the type of foreign policy that we're seeing, especially as it pertains to Israel. Cenk.
They all should be. They're lobbyists. Who are we kidding? They're lobbyists. All these people in Washington are lobbyists. All the people who pretend to be consultants in DC are lobbyists, and half of them represent foreign governments, and they hide that. They should all be outed as foreign agents, and if they didn't register as foreign agents, they should be arrested. They all work. These guys work for foreign governments, and then they go into our government and they betray this country. And they say, "Oh no, you have to funnel money to my client." I mean, oops, I get to hide my clients. You have to funnel your money, your hard-earned money, to a different government, and you have to serve them loyally. And no matter how many wars they start and how many people they slaughter, you all have to give your paycheck over to them. But no, I'm not going to tell you who I work for. So I work for. They work for Israeli companies. We just told you that. They work for companies that fund Israel's wars, like Boeing. We just told you that. Do they also work for Israel? Oh no, technically we're not lobbyists. No, you are lobbyists. Get the hell out of here. And then why are we unclear as to whether this is an actual sale or not? Because mainstream media are a bunch of liars. So they keep calling it a sale. But here, I'll read you from ABC News about other things that they called a sale. Remember how Anna told you we've already given them $17.9 billion? I want to read you that paragraph because that also got characterized as a sale in so many articles that I read. Here's the paragraph this today. The weapons package would add to a record of at least $17.9 billion in military aid that the US has provided Israel since the Hamas attacks on October 7th. So wait, is it aid or is it sales? I think what it is it looks like they're being characterized as sales so the American people aren't furious, but then we're financing those so-called sales. So it ain't a sale at all. It's just a giant gift to Israel, gift after gift. And we're not giving them healthcare. We're not giving them positive gifts that would help the Israeli people. We're giving them gifts to murder Palestinians and commit war crimes. And then all of our media is lying on their behalf and calling it, a sale, as if we got something out of it. I know that's what's happened in the past. We're still not clear about the 8 billion because every reporter in the country sucks and won't clarify if it's a sale or if it's a goddamn gift from the American taxpayers to kill more people and start more wars. And finally, that gets to the last point here. He said several times, we did such a great job of preventing this war from broadening. Did you? That's another giant lie. Israel is bombing 5 to 7 neighbors, depending on how you count. It's bombed Syria, it's bombed Lebanon, it's bombed West Bank, Gaza Strip, it's bombed Yemen, it's bombed Iran. How is this not broadening the war? Yeah, those countries have very limited ability to bomb back. So every once in a while, Iran will bomb back. Hezbollah has these pea shooters that they fire, et cetera, or used to fire. And then every time Blinken goes out there and goes, "Oh my God, poor Israel. Now they get to slaughter tens of thousands of dollars. Give them more money, give them more money. Let them slaughter more Arabs. Who gives a goddamn about Arabs anyway?" So that's the job of our Secretary of State, right? And you heard what he called it, a just defense. Does this look like justice to you? Over 25,000 women and children slaughtered by the terrorist state of Israel.
And that's an
we had to
underestimate.
pay for all of it. None of that is just. It's injustice defined. Israel is Goliath, and those poor Palestinians are David, and they're being crushed by people like Antony Blinken. He just puts on a suit and he uses fancy words, but he's a thug who loves to finance terrorism as long as it's done by Israel and companies that pay his bills. So that's the kind of corrupt, terrible person Antony Blinken is. And don't worry though, he'll be replaced by someone just as bad, if not worse, because Marco Rubio is going to come in for Donald Trump, and Marco Rubio is also a neocon, warmonger, and totally owned by Israel. So our next Secretary of State will also serve Israel very dutifully. Maybe he'll care about us as a 13th priority.
When we come back from the break, we'll watch Senator Chuck Schumer squirm on Meet the Press.
Back on TYT. Let's go to TYT.com for members. There, Not a Dragon says, when the White House changes parties, foreign policy rarely changes. That's right, because it's the same foreign policy no matter what. War. And Trump says he's anti-war. What has he done that's anti-war so far? Nothing, nada, okay? What he's said so far for his second term is, I promise that Israel can kill anyone they like and we'll finance it. So what's the change from Biden? Nothing, except, he loves Russia. So he'll make sure that Ukraine gives up territory for another foreign government. Okay. Shelby says these interviews are just Biden doing his final round of showing how he's the best propagandist money can buy for the foreign governments he will begin lobbying for in 3, 2, 1. And even more so for Antony Blinken. Antony Blinken is going to go cash a giant check from his company is probably from all those foreign governments, but we live with a free press, but we're not allowed to know who the incredibly corrupt former Secretary of State is going to take money from, even if it's from foreign governments. Hey, right-wingers, stop focusing on Dr. Fauci and Liz Cheney that are in the past. Focus on what's happening next, okay? You should focus on all of these lobbyists that are pretending not to be lobbyists that all work for foreign governments. Salt of the Union says, man, Blinken and his cohorts should be in the UN courts right now. Of course. He's a giant war criminal, but he's so fancy. Everybody in Washington loves him. They will find, like, if you have somebody in the country that's listening to us right now, that's an average person, they love and agree with what we're saying, and it's so obvious to them. In Washington, the things that I'm saying are scandalous. He's not supposed to make millions by betraying America. He's in a nice suit. You guys are such radicals. Okay, Kelly K says, actually Trudeau was going to deal exactly what Biden did and stay in as leader until his finance minister resigned. She was the first falling domino, followed by other cabinet ministers and then backbenchers, other members of parliament within his party that pushed him into having to resign. And Kelly, that's a good point. And so, yes, he made the decision much earlier than Biden. That's what I gave him credit for, and allowed his party to recover. But you're not wrong that he was forced into it in his own way. But I think that he learned from Biden that if he tried to fight that all the way, that it was going to end poorly anyway. But good details on it, Kelly. Appreciate it. Eclectic Miscellaneous said, is it just me, or does it seem like the entire so-called democratic world is falling apart? Governments falling in Canada, France, and South Korea. Extreme right parties rising or even coming to power in Italy, Hungary, Germany, and depending on your definition, the US too. People everywhere are sick of business as usual, and it seems like it's spinning out of control. Yes, this, like, we're on a clock here, and people can't stand neoliberal corporate rule. I've said it 2,000 times. I'm going to say it 2,000 more times. No one in Washington is going to listen because they are neoliberal corporate rule, and they're going to say, no, Cenk, we just need better messaging. We need to blame our voters more, and then people will figure it out. No, it's the corruption, stupid. Shelby says Cenk should just start spelling his name Jank and call it a day. will make all these political panels easier. I know I'm kind of a pain in the ass that way, but at least I don't judge people who mispronounce it. Urban Hermit said Trudeau initially ran on a promise of not buying F-35 fighter jets, and then he went on to do just that. He lost me there. I'm sure that he lost a lot of people there. Kelly Kay said the only problem is the Conservative Party leader has gaslit Canadians into thinking he's a populist, when in fact he's an establishment corporate shill and always has been. Gee, where have I seen that before, Kelly? Here as well. We'll be back. All right, back on TYT, Jen Canana with you guys. More news, Castro.
Why don't we start with this?
You were obviously in close contact with President Biden well before the public tuned into that debate that ultimately led to him stepping down. I want to play you a little bit of something you said last year. Take a look.
I talk to President Biden, regularly, sometimes several times in a week, or usually several times in a week. His mental acuity is great. It's fine. It's as good as it's been over the years. All this right-wing propaganda that his mental acuity has declined is wrong.
Those statements from Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer were in February of 2024, when clearly President Joe Biden's mental acuity was not as great as Senator Schumer would have you believe. Now, he was confronted with that video while on Meet the Press over the weekend. And the real question is, how did he respond to it? Let's take a look.
Leader Schumer, what do you say to Americans who feel as though you and other top Democrats misled them about President Biden's mental acuity?
No. Look, we didn't. And let's look at President Biden. He's had an amazing record. The legislation we passed, one of the most significant groups of legislation since since Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, putting in 235 judges, a record, and he's a patriot. He's a great guy. And when he stepped down, he did it on his own because he thought it was better not only for the Democratic Party, for America. We should all salute him. We should all salute him.
Do you feel, as we have this conversation today, that President Biden could serve another 4 years had he stayed in the race and potentially won?
Well, I'm not going to speculate. As I said, I think his record is a stellar one, and he'll go down in history as a really outstanding president.
All these people need to be voted out of the Democratic Party. Okay, it's not good enough that Biden's gone. People like Chuck Schumer, they need to be gone. I mean, the audacity to continue lying to the American people after everything that's transpired during the past election cycle, it blows me away. It really does. Go ahead, Cenk.
Yeah, I mean, look, not only did he pretend that Biden's still in great shape. I mean, brother, who are you kidding? Really? And he was an amazing president, et cetera. But to be fair to him, every Democrat was pretending that Joe Biden was a great president, the best one since FDR, and young and dynamic until the debate. And so now I see tons of Democrats saying that, oh, they're so aggrieved by Biden. What are you guys talking about? When we said Biden should drop out, you all, and when I say all you, I mean Democrats in Washington, people in mainstream media, you all yelled at us. I said, how dare you? You should bow to the powerful. Bow, obey. Pretend he's young and dynamic. But on top of that, Schumer said, oh, he was so gracious, he did it on his own. No, he didn't.
It's so ridiculous.
Outrageous lie. We had to push and punch and shove, and he didn't want to do it on a boat. He didn't want to do it on a goat. He's still complaining about it. He still said to a reporter the other day, apparently behind the scenes, or it got leaked, that he said that he would have won if he'd stayed in the race. The guy's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. And I get it, he has dementia, right? So the people around him are monsters. They're still pushing him out there. Go, Joe, say we would have won, Joe. Here's what you should be saying, Joe. He doesn't know what the hell he's saying. And monsters like Jill Biden, Hunter Biden, Antony Blinken, all and Chuck Schumer, all of these guys aided and abetted what happened here. Obama and Pelosi had buyer's remorse near the end when they're like, oh, our propaganda isn't going to work, so let's ditch him and get a new guy. But overall, they're all guilty. They all knew and they all lied through their teeth, including Chuck Schumer.
So I'm going to be a little more fair because I think it is hyperbole to say all Democrats knew. I think Democratic leadership certainly knew. Someone like Chuck Schumer, who was in constant contact with Joe Biden, certainly knew, which is why I thought this story was more interesting than others, because this isn't just some rank and file Democrat. And remember, Cenk, we did that story about the huge expose in regard to Biden's mental decline, who knew what. And there were rank and file Democrats who were trying to get in touch with Biden during his term, and they couldn't. I forget the name of the one Democrat who said he was able to speak to Biden literally once during the entire 4 years. Yeah, go ahead.
I got to clarify. So I agree and disagree. So I agree with you that they didn't all consciously know. And I'm sure that tons of them told themselves pretty little lies. And mostly they were in a bubble. And in that bubble, you never, ever question leadership. You never question authority. You always bow your head like a good, subservient little boy and girl. You follow orders, whether it's a donor or it's Democratic leadership. So you're right that they didn't all know consciously, right? But a lot of them did know because they interacted with Biden. And to the point that you're making, a lot of them couldn't even get in touch with Biden. But did any of them say anything publicly?
No, that's sacrilege.
They did the exact opposite.
But hold on. It's sacrilege for Democrats. Okay, you're not allowed to have any disagreement. You're not allowed to go against the grain even a little bit in the Democratic Party. Okay,
that's right.
You have to just go along with what Democratic leadership demands, and that's a huge problem. That ended up leading to Democrats losing big in this election.
And it wasn't just that they were yelling at us, that we're not important.
Who cares about us?
Yeah, but what my point is, they yelled at Jon Stewart when he did it, they yelled at Charlemagne when he did it, but most importantly, Dean Phillips, a US congressman, ran against Joe Biden, and they took his head off. All these people that are now like, oh boy, we had concerns and blah, blah, blah. No, you guys were the ones lying and trying to, character assassinate Dean Phillips and everyone else who ran against Joe Biden. They're all guilty. And guys, that's exactly the number one point I'm trying to make, is that the next time they lie to you and tell you to bow your head and obey because the Wizard of Oz really knows what he's doing, and don't look behind the curtain, just trust the wizard that he's a genius and young and dynamic. They're lying to you. So when they say it about Pete Buttigieg or Gavin Newsom, well, they'll be younger and they'll have a new script, but it's the same old corporate guys who are never, ever going to look out for you. They're only going to look out for themselves and their donors.
Now, a question was raised in regard to what led to the big losses that Democrats suffered in this election cycle. And what I thought was interesting is Schumer immediately pivoted to what I think Democrats excel in, what they're really good at, which is placing the blame on the electorate. Take a look.
One of the things we have to do is we must focus on the working families of America. We believe in them. And we passed all kinds of legislation that helped them. The infrastructure bill, which made our economy stronger and employed lots of people. The chip hubs, where we're now having chip hubs in places to do new manufacturing and new research that were left out before. Missoula, Montana, Bloomington, Indiana. The bill lowering the cost of prescription drugs. As of January 1st, 10 of the most popular prescription drugs will be greatly lowered because we finally allowed, under our leadership, the drug companies, we forced them to negotiate with Medicare. So we did a lot of good things, but all too often, Kristen, we talked about the mechanics of the legislation and the details of the legislation, and we really didn't show the kind of empathy and concern to average, or show enough of it to average working families who didn't realize how much we had done and how much we care for them.
I mean, the working families just didn't know. They didn't know how awesome we were and how much we delivered for them. The working class families that I myself, Chuck Schumer, said we didn't need back in 2016. And this is his direct quote as he was speaking before a Washington Post panel. He said, quote, "For every blue collar Democrat we lose in Western Pennsylvania, we will pick up 2 moderate Republicans in the suburbs in Philadelphia. And you can repeat that in Ohio and Illinois and Wisconsin." That is what Chuck Schumer said during the 2016 presidential election. The abandonment of the working class in America was very much intentional by Democrats like Chuck Schumer, and it didn't work out for them. And rather than take responsibility for a total garbage strategy, he's just arguing, no, we actually did incredible things for working class voters. It's just that they didn't realize it. Maybe we need to do a better job explaining it to them. No, I'm gonna go ahead and say that most working class voters, people who are still in the job market, people who still need to earn a living, people who can't qualify for Social Security at the moment, or Medicare at the moment, aren't gonna be too jazzed about the 10 pharmaceutical drugs that the Medicare system specifically can now negotiate for lower drug prices. If you don't have Medicare, that policy doesn't impact you. Okay, so it's just so incredibly frustrating to see Democratic leadership still fail to take personal responsibility for their failed strategies and how much they have failed in delivering for working class voters intentionally.
Yeah. So he had that genius idea of getting more moderate Republicans, even if it cost Democrats their base of working class voters. So how many Republicans did they get to switch back in 2016? 7%. Ooh. And then how about in 2020? 6%. How about in 2024? 5%. So less and less each time. So why do they keep going back to that well when it is demonstrably and empirically an incorrect political strategy? Because to them, it's not an incorrect political strategy. That's where a lot of their donors are. They're Republicans who are moderates who live in the suburbs. And they feed Chuck Schumer's mouth full of billions of dollars in donations. So he's like, I love moderate Republicans. I'll give them anything they want. He doesn't care if he loses the election. Based on that, he'd rather win. He'd rather have power. But most of all, he has to serve his donors. Guys, I know someone who worked with Schumer in the past. Without divulging names were said in private, when Schumer was asked, this was a long time ago, about a particular issue, he said, I'll have to ask Tish what he thinks. So who's Tish? That's the Tish family in New York. They're giant, giant donors. Chuck Schumer literally asks his donors what he should do on every issue. So that's the level of corruption that we're talking about here. So he doesn't think it's a brilliant political strategy. He just thinks this is what my donors paid for. This is what I'm gonna give them. If people found out how much the Democrats didn't do for the working class, they'd vote for them even less. So what happened in this term? Who killed the $15 minimum wage? Joe Biden did. He asked for to be taken out of the bill, even though he ran on it. It was the very first thing he did was to make sure that you were not gonna get an increase in your wages, because his donors didn't want it. And who killed the public option? Joe Biden did. He didn't even propose it. Paid family leave, didn't try at all. It's at 84%. Any idiot could pass paid family leave, but Joe Biden didn't try. Chuck Schumer didn't try. They didn't try on any of these things because they had to check with the Tish family and the Soros family and the now Musk and the Adelsons and every freaking donor there is. They don't work for us. Chuck Schumer is just a very, very poor liar. So, but right now progressives in Congress are like, oh, how can we work with Chuck Schumer? You're not, these guys are not on our side, man. There's no working with the Chuck Schumers of the world. Just defeat them already.
Well, when we come back for the second hour of the show, let's talk a little bit about Elon Musk suspending a reporter who proved that he's not using sock puppet accounts on his platform. Weird. And then later, we'll also talk a little bit about Kamala Harris and her treatment of Senator Bernie Sanders during the official Senate swearing in. We'll be right back.
Now I'm gonna do something very different here and read some one-star reviews of the Young Turks on Apple Podcasts. Donnie Franchise said, pretty much it's like listening to a trash compactor. Someone else said, negative, anti-American propaganda. And others said, out of context, misquotes, typical leftists who are afraid to debate, just smear. These two would be perfect for CNN or MSLSD. Well, Donnie, you might have a point, because I feel like a trash compactor right now after taking in all those garbage reviews. But thanks for listening anyway. We are, in fact, unapologetically progressive. And if you're not ready for bold commentary, then we're not the show for you. On the Young Turks, we speak up about the issues that matter, and we want to make positive change happen. And now here's why we actually do the show. Mariel Morales said, found this podcast from the True Crime podcast, Fruit Loops, and other great progressive podcasts. I've become an instant fan of the Young Turks. Great conversation, great takes, very well composed, factual podcast, very informative. Love to hear that. Z55 said, it's a joy to experience such awareness and intelligence from fascinating people. And Anna is gorgeous and brilliant. Apparently I'm just fascinating, but I'll take it. Paul for Progress said, news well delivered. Appreciate it. KOOK said, Democrats and Republicans are fair game for TYT. And if Anna or Cenk provide disinformation about anything, they will admit they made a mistake and correct it. We appreciate you noticing that we are honest. To people who actually listen to the substance of the show, thank you. Your listenership supports what we do. Leave a 5-star rating for the Young Turks on Apple Podcasts. Let's take the ratings back from the trolls. Everywhere you look, things are getting more expensive. Here at TYT, we understand this. That's why we're not gonna price gouge you or use inflation as an excuse to raise our prices. A TYT membership is not your typical subscription, but basic membership is still just $4.99. So what do you get for that price? For starters, you're getting exclusive programming, unique, exclusive designs from Shop TYT, access to a members-only chat, giveaways, emojis, and so many other amazing perks. But most importantly, you're helping to make an impact. As a TYT member, you not only help us do the shows every day, but you drive real positive change in the process. In 2017, we helped to start Justice Democrats right here on TYT. That's a group that got a dozen progressives elected into Congress. That's amazing, you did that. Your support also funds TYT's very own investigative reporting. Just recently, our reporters exposed the Fellowship Foundation and pressured lawmakers into boycotting that bigoted event. Isn't that amazing? We raised over $30,000 for Jackson, Mississippi and delivered clean water to thousands of people in need. Our petitions, polls, and community of activists help keep the corruption of Washington in check. That's the impact of what just $4.99 a month from our members can do. And we're just getting started. Positive change doesn't occur overnight, but with your contribution, we can make it happen together. You know that viral video you saw of me? First of all, it's bull. Second of all, they got it from a snippet of the live show. You should check out the live show so you see the full context of everything we say. Weekdays, 6 o'clock Eastern, Young Turks on YouTube or wherever you get TYT.
The support we receive from members is the backbone of our movement to drive positive change. We need viewers like you to keep moving forward. Visit tyt.com/team and join our movement today.
No, that's not happening.
Let's see how Earth responds to that.
Back on TYT, Cenk and Anna with you guys. All right, more news. What do you got, Anna?
Well, there's some big news over at X. A lot more people are calling out Elon Musk for his censorious nature, and now he's gotten so extreme in his censorship that he's going after journalists who are reporting things that make him look good. Let's get to it.
I can't, honestly, I don't believe you're not me.
Yeah, that's a theory.
You are
That's a
me.
theory. People think I'm legitimately your clone. There's been theories that I'm one of your Neuralink experiments. Can you like clarify that I'm not one of your Neuralink experiments, or maybe I am and I wouldn't realize it? Because that's advanced.
You just heard from both Elon Musk and an ex-user who goes by Adrian Dittman, who many believed was actually a sock puppet account for Elon Musk, especially since this individual would reply to Elon Musk's tweets and generally speaking support everything that Elon Musk had to say. But it turns out that's not the case. A journalist investigated it and disproved that Adrian Dittman is actually a sock puppet account for Elon Musk. The problem is that journalist then got suspended from X, Elon Musk's platform, for reporting that. So let's get into the details. So if you're unfamiliar with the Dittman-Musk situation, let's get you caught up. Throughout 2024, many X users began speculating that an account named Adrian Dittman was actually the sock puppet account used by Elon Musk to prop himself up on his own platform. Look, crazier things have happened, but here's what the account looks like on X. So interest in this theory reemerged when Dittman began appearing in spaces to defend Elon Musk. Of course, spaces are like these conversations that take place on X. And he would defend Musk and his support for H-1B visas, something that, a contingent of the MAGA movement has kind of turned on Musk over because they don't want to have, foreign workers come into the country and take jobs from Americans. And so journalist Jacqueline Sweet with The Spectator decided to investigate this and ended up basically proving that they are not the same person. She published the piece revealing who the real Adrian Dittman happens to be. Let's take a look at a screenshot of the piece itself. It's titled "The Real Adrian Dittman, an Elon Musk fan in Fiji tricks the world." Okay, fun stuff. Now, in her piece, she writes that no, Adrian Dittman on X is not Elon. He appears to be, in fact, Adrian Dittman, a German Musk fan living in Fiji, according to a Spectator analysis of his posts, social media, deleted content, AI art, comments on spaces, and unique biographical details. And according to Sweet, the real life Dittman is the son of a German software entrepreneur who has launched several businesses in Fiji, including a forestry venture, a bottled water company, and a marina and yachting facility. Now, following the publication of the article, Musk decided this is a good opportunity to engage in some trolling. And so he writes, "I am Adrian Dittman. It's time the world knew." He then weirdly and subsequently suspended Sweet from X for 30 days, alleging that she engaged in doxing. Per Spectator World managing editor Matt McDonald, let's take a look at what he has to say. It appears that Jacqueline Sweet has had her X account restricted for her Spectator reporting into Adrian Dittman not being an Elon Musk alt account, and then provide some screenshots giving some clarification as to why the suspension happened in the first place. So let's take a look at the next graphic, which shows the kind of message Jacqueline Sweet received. And in it, you can notice, we highlighted it for you, violent or misleading content that could lead to real world harm. And so the argument they're assuming is that Elon Musk found the piece to be a little too specific about the identity of Adrian Dittman. And even though all of this information is publicly available, well, it amounts to doxing. Now, when I think of doxing, I think of individuals sharing the home address and phone number of an individual that's being targeted in order to direct harm to that person. That is not what happened here at all. So I'll give you some examples, some excerpts where I guess you can argue there's a little bit of specificity, but certainly not enough to find Dittman or do anything to him. She writes that in July of 2023, Musk and X's Dittman spoke to each other on an X space, and X's Dittman explained his unique upbringing and accent. Quote, "I grew up in Gibraltar, lived in Morocco for a few years," he said. He also said, "I can tell you I'm in Oceania. when asked where he lived, but didn't want to offer more specifics. Last night on another X space, he claimed he is in his 20s. So I don't think that's doxing, especially when the person himself was disclosing this information publicly on a massive platform. But I'm curious what you think, Jake.
Yeah, look, Elon is hypocritical on censorship. No, I didn't see that coming. So what we told the right wing back when they were saying that Twitter was censoring everything is, look, if you got a specific story like the Hunter Biden laptop, okay, God bless. Let's have a conversation about that. And back then, we weren't sure if they should block that story, right? But when you say, oh, everything should be free for all, of course that's not true. You can't dox, you can't defame. There's all these different laws that you can't break, and there is no special exemption to American laws if you create a social media platform, right? So, and we said there'd have to be some form of that, and it's not censorship to do that particular part. Now, and if any right winger has it, they're going to do censorship anyway, because they're going to have to do things that legally you have to do, stop people from doing the crimes that I just mentioned, right? You can't say, for example, go kill that person, right? That's a crime. That's not free speech. So, but on top of that, in my experience, the right wing leadership loves censorship. So go ahead, try to criticize Israel and see what happens to you, right? So in Florida and other states, they'll take your contracts away from the government if you dare to criticize Israel. You can get arrested on a college campus, but I'm just giving that as one example. There's a billion other ways that they censor anything that they don't agree with, right? So was Elon going to be an angel on this? No, he was never going to be an angel on it. And so now he's actually going over the top. And now there's been 3 different stories that affected Elon in some way. And this one is the most amazing because she kind of proved something that he should be in favor of, right?
Right.
But nope, no reporting allowed on Elon, no reporting allowed on any of his businesses or any of his business practices, no criticism, no nothing. So right wing, are you super mad at Elon for doing censorship and arguably worse than before he bought Twitter? I don't remember Jack Dorsey banning any criticism of Jack Dorsey. Maybe I missed it, but I don't remember that. But Elon is doing it specifically about himself. Doesn't seem like free speech absolutist to me.
Yeah, in fact, I remember when Jack Dorsey or the old guard were still in charge of Twitter before it became X under Elon Musk's purchase. One of the big critiques that I actually agreed with was that there wasn't really consistency in regard to enforcing the TOS, that some individuals would get suspended or banned from the platform for behavior or actions that others would also engage in, but weren't punished for those same actions. And so I think that that was a legitimate criticism that is now also being carried out by Elon Musk himself. There's a lack of clarity in regard to why he's making the types of decisions he's making in suspending people or demonetizing people. And you're right, I think the one consistency that you see in all of these stories involving Elon Musk is that they involve Elon Musk. And so whenever you have this much power in the hands of one individual, of course, there are going to be abuses of power. And I think what a lot of people felt good about when Elon Musk took over Twitter is that, okay, now the censorship is going to happen against the left and the right's in charge. Well, that's not the right attitude to have either. And besides which, it didn't really come to fruition in the way that people expected, did it? So it's really not about left versus right. It's really about speech that Elon Musk likes or dislikes. And in this case, even when it comes to reporting that paints Elon Musk in a more favorable view. I mean, what could be more embarrassing than being caught using sock puppet accounts to make yourself look good on social media? It's super embarrassing. I mean, I would welcome this kind of reporting if I were Elon Musk. So it's very strange that this reporter, Jacqueline Sweet, ended up getting suspended or punished as a result of her reporting, which again, you could read the entire piece for yourselves. There is no doxing in the reporting. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and he used that excuse against Ken Klippenstein as well. And he censored one thing that you could argue was doxing, at least you could have that argument, right? But the second thing that he censored had nothing to do with doxing. And so he just didn't like the report, and it was against his interests. So here we go again, right? And so, look, the only thing I can think of, Anna, is that maybe he has many other sock puppet accounts, and so he didn't want anybody looking into it at all. So this one, like, he takes the win. Hey, this one was not a sock puppet account, but you better watch yourself if you look into this again. Who knows? And look, he's got literally has more money than anyone else on the planet. But look at all the things he does to protect his ego anyway. It's amazing to me, man. These rich people are nuts. Go enjoy life, man. But they're so obsessed with their own egos. Let it go.
Best point ever made. I would have been in Sorrento a long time ago. Okay. Oh, I'm gonna be on social media all day and I'm already a billionaire. Why? Why? But anyway, there you have it. Let's take a break. But when we come back, I wanted to talk a little bit about this weird interaction between Kamala Harris and Senator Bernie Sanders during the official Senate swearing in. Does it mean anything? Are we reading too much into it? We'll discuss when we return.
Elon.
All right, guys. You know what it's a great time for? Annual membership. Makes sense. We're at the beginning of the year. TYT.com/join gets you there. Gets you to be an American hero, be part of the Operation Hope community, Operation Joy community, Operation Kick Ass community. I made that one up, but we all kick ass. Create news. By the way, you can also create a free account. Go to TYT.com. Get all the different things that we offer for free at TYT.com. If you're watching on YouTube, you don't want FOMO. I know I don't want FOMO. FOMO is problematic. So if you ring the bell, you don't miss out on anything. It's beautiful. The bell's down below. It's almost as beautiful as the join button, and it costs you nothing. And tonight on, I'm going to be on TMZ Investigates. Because it's about it's actually a documentary that they did on Fox. You're going to see it on Fox at 8 o'clock Eastern, which is going to come up in just a little bit. It's about Luigi Mangione, and I'll tell you this fun thing. After I did the interview with Harvey, the camera guys said that I should run for president, and I said too late. So apparently they liked what I said, and I'm talking about the TMZ camera guys. So it was a good interview. I don't know how much of it they put into the doc, but check that out tonight if you can on Fox. All right, let's go to TYT.com members. Underscore wrote in a little bit earlier. Pacman just put out a video on Cenk and hyping up their conversation on Wednesday. David seems skeptical but receptive, and I look forward to a productive conversation. Me too. David's a good guy. We disagree on some things, but it's no big deal at all. Usually a really good conversation with him. This whole thing of disagreeing about talking to the right, good smart folks are saying that, as well as others. And I'm confounded by it, confounded. So we should never talk to anyone. They're all racist, fascist, and if we wall ourselves off into a cave, I bet we win the next election. Okay, I don't know that David's gonna make that point. If he does, I'm ready to engage on that. Sexy Speed Racer says, Canadians need to learn what their southern neighbors haven't yet. Don't elect conservatives to any government. I hear you, but to be fair, it was mainly a liberal government that failed in Canada. Jenks, I don't think conservatives are offering any better, but I'm just keeping it real. Jenks Left Tricep of Fury says, do you mean the US isn't the only dysfunctional government? Shocking. Yes, Canada has its problems too. Although historically they've done way better than us, and they have universal health care and paid family leave. So you are better off there in terms of at least protecting your life. It's just makes a very important point. Anna, your eyes are on point today. She points out. Okay,
Thank you.
Peppermint Dragon says, I have a group of Native American friends in Canada. They all hated Trudeau. So apparently all the wokeness didn't help in that regard. K Dragon Battling for Truth and Justice says the issue is more dollars in the working man's pocket. That is the issue. You can't work for all of the very relevant social issues if you can't afford to buy food. Jake, Anna, news, go.
Let's talk about Kamala Harris and Senator Bernie Sanders.
Yes, sir.
Stand right there. That is not your nature to just stand where you're told to stand. Give it a try.
That was a strange reaction to Senator Bernie Sanders during the official Senate swearing in, where Kamala Harris told him to stand in a specific place and tell him, I know it's not in your nature to stand where you're told to stand. I don't know if I'm reading too much into it, Cenk, but it seemed a little like she's trying to say something. You get what I'm saying? Like there was more to it than telling him to do something.
Like that old TYT clip. It was a little aggressive. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, look, it's a joke. And it's true, Bernie is not good at doing what he's told to do, except he did under Biden. And I thought that was the problem, not the solution. But anyways, overall, not a big deal. They joked around, God bless. And I mean, if she's got a little passive aggressive in her after losing an election, I'm gonna let it slide.
Okay, all right, are you not merciful? Now, if she was intending to be passive aggressive, what could be behind it? Well, I'm gonna go ahead and speculate that it could be the fact that Senator Bernie Sanders, especially after the election, has been calling out the corporate corruption of the Democratic Party. And when it comes to corporate corruption, well, let's just say the Harris campaign didn't raise billions of dollars out of thin air. And so just before the election, Senator Sanders made these comments while on CNN.
This should not be a close election. And I think the Democrats, win or lose, have got to take a very hard look at themselves and ask how it could be that a significant majority of working class people in this country are prepared to vote for Donald Trump. And the truth is, what has got to happen is the Democrats have got to wake up and say, you know what? Instead of worrying about big money interests and campaign contributions from billionaires, we got to stand with the working class of this country. And we need an agenda that is a popular agenda that speaks to Democrats and Republicans.
Senator Sanders says Democrats need a popular agenda. Stop listening to your corporate donors. The corporate capture of the Democratic Party is a liability. And to be sure, following that interview, the Democrats went on to lose the presidential race. They lost control of the Senate, and Donald Trump won the popular vote. Now, immediately after the election, Senator Sanders also released a fiery takedown of the Democratic Party, something that we covered extensively here at TYT. But in case you missed it, he said it should come as no great surprise that the Democratic Party, which has abandoned working class people, would find that the working class has abandoned them. While the Democratic leadership defends the status quo, the American people are angry and want change, and they're right. Will the big money interests and well-paid consultants who control the Democratic Party learn any real lessons from this disastrous campaign? Will they understand the pain and political alienation that tens of millions of Americans are experiencing? Do they have any ideas as to how we can take on the increasingly powerful oligarchy, which has had so much economic and political power? And he comes to the conclusion that probably not. So again, it's my speculation that if Kamala Harris was intending to be salty during that interaction, this could have something to do with it. But I have a lot to say about some of the latest reporting in regard to the grifters who took a chunk of those billions raised by the Harris campaign and the possible self-dealing that's taking place here when it comes to some of these consultants. Before we get to that, any thoughts, Cenk?
Yeah, of course they caught feelings about what Bernie said overall, and of course Bernie is right. Look, I love that he said it, and I'm glad to see that he's back, because he was in a bit of a hibernation because he thought he was going to get all these progressive bills passed by working with Joe Biden. But having said that, I think that there is still a problem. He doesn't name names. So he talks about political consultants and politicians, but if he named a single name, then Washington would explode, right? And they'd be like, how dare you, your colleagues, right? So he doesn't do it. And it becomes harder to fight, right? Without bad guys, it just seems like an amorphous cloud you're fighting against. So if I was him, I'd name every name there is.
So every elected lawmaker in Congress that's a Democrat? I mean,
pretty much, yeah.
Okay,
I would.
all right.
And I'd give specific examples. There's so many of them that sold us out so badly. Like, for example, when they wanted to negotiate more drugs to the prices of more drugs, all the Democrats who take money from the drug companies came in and said, no way. And they fought tooth and nail. They should all be named. There should be giant posters with their face and name on it saying these are the crooks who sold you out to the drug companies. But no, everybody's too polite and civil. So if they think that Bernie Sanders is a barn burning populist, nah, he's a cuddly teddy bear. There should be a real raging populist in the Democratic Party that names names and takes these corporate goons, grabs them by the shorts and throws them the hell out of the Capitol. But we haven't seen that in the Democratic Party, because mainstream media would, of course, do the biggest character assassination you have ever seen in your life if anyone dared to be honest in Washington.
Yeah, that literally does not exist in the Democratic Party. Like, I'm thinking about even like the most progressive people in the Democratic Party, and I would not label them, populist. But look, let's get back to Kamala Harris, because I think this latest reporting from Sludge is something that should actually be investigated, okay? Because look, we've talked a lot about where the money went, the campaign money went. But what's amazing is the clear examples of self-dealing that's taking place here. And I don't understand how this is at all acceptable. So thanks to new FEC filings, we learned some pretty damning new information about something called Future Forward PAC. And that's actually the main dark money group funding the Harris campaign. Now, Future Forward PAC spent more than $500 million during the 2024 campaign cycle, making it by far the highest spending PAC ever. A substantial portion of its funding came from its nonprofit arm, which does not disclose its donors, but reportedly received large donations last year from Bill Gaetz and Michael Bloomberg, okay? So Future Forward PAC is one of the PACs, pro-Kamala PACs, that raised a significant amount of money on her behalf. Now, the question is, what did they then spend the money on? And that's where the potential self-dealing takes place. So Future Forward specifically paid a company called GCJ Research almost $18 million for their work on the campaign. And that's pretty fishy, because GCJ Research is named after founders of Future Forward PAC. Okay, and that includes Gaurav Sharol, Chauncey McLean, and John Formowitz. Okay, those are three individuals who founded Future Forward PAC, and then Future Forward PAC raised a bunch of money on behalf of Kamala Harris's campaign, and then spent $18 million on other like election-related companies that were like that these individuals were part of. Okay, so let me give you some specific examples. One of the things that the firm did during the election was create online and text message surveys. GCJ Research was Future Forward's second highest paid vendor as of October 16th, according to the FEC. So the folks at Future Forward raise money for the campaign and then funnel that money to other organizations that the same people who founded Future Forward are employed by. How is that not self-dealing? Okay, and the connections don't end there. So McLean's company, PFB Media, was also paid by Future Forward PAC. The company was paid more than $1.2 million by the PAC for ad production, according to FEC records. How is this legal? In November of last year, Li Fang also reported that another research firm, Open Labs, which also does business under Blue Rose Research, received another $759,707 from Future Forward. The founders of the Super PAC also work at Open Labs. Guys, how is this okay? It's like they raised money not to help Kamala Harris win. They raised money to pay themselves. This is crazy. This is insane.
Yeah. So look, we don't know if they spend that money more efficiently than a different polling company would have spent it, but we do know that they gave your money to themselves. We do know that, okay? And remember, a lot of the consultants, especially if they're working on the part where they collect the money and then spend it on ads, get 15%. So the more money that they raise, even if it's counterproductive, even if you're kissing donor ass and costing yourself tons of voters, they have a financial incentive to keep doing that, even if it costs them the election, because they're going to raise more money from those same donors. So they've got already one terrible incentive in that 15% that they get. That's usually how it works. And then they have now a second terrible incentive, which is take all your money and funnel it to their own companies. I mean, if this company was a really respected polling organization that didn't employ the top 3 people in the Kamala Harris campaign, then I'd say, well, I mean, you got to do polling, and apparently they spent it in that direction, okay? But it does employ the top 3 people. In fact, it's named after the top 3 people in the Kamala campaign. And on top of that, they had almost no contracts before the Kamala campaign. They had one $7,000 contract in the last cycle. That's it. So this thing has no experience, no nothing, and all of a sudden the people that handle the money of the Kamala campaign, they just decided that they should get $18 million of it. And I guess they did some polling. Was it really worth $18 million? You'll never find out. How much of it was margin? You'll never find out.
It wasn't worth the paper it was printed on, Cenk. Okay, like she performed far worse than the polling indicated. Far worse. Come on.
Yeah, no, I know. No, I'm just telling you, like, we're being fair. The content of it, if they would like to come out and say, oh no, look, here's how much we spent, here's how little margin we made, and here's how it compares to the other vendors, I'd be thrilled to get it. But they'll do no such thing. This is the last time you'll ever hear about it, because mainstream media doesn't care about corruption like this. They love corruption like this. So they're not even gonna talk about it. And they love Kamala Harris, they love Joe Biden, they love all corrupt politicians. And so all these stories never ever get covered. But they're so proud that they raised billions. You didn't win the election. You have nothing to be proud of, nothing. If you ran the Kamala Harris campaign, you're an utter failure. Yeah, maybe you're gonna have a nice new mansion wherever you live, based on good, hardworking Americans who believed in you and donated to you, let alone the giant corporations. But you didn't accomplish a damn thing. You ran a terrible campaign and you lost to Donald Trump, who you said was an idiot and a monster. So what does that make you?
I mean, really, it's so true. It's remarkable how little these people actually care about the future of the country and how they see a presidential election as an opportunity to make some money. I mean, to the detriment of the American people. It's amazing. But there you have it. All right.
I loathe the corruption. I loathe it. And so any reporter that isn't talking about the corruption of establishment Republicans and Democrats is not a real reporter. They're just a marketing executive. That's all, period.
And guys, we gotta show some love to Sludge. I mean, the whole point of that publication is to call out corruption in our political system, and they're consistent on it. I really appreciate the work they do. And this particular piece was published by Donald Shaw over at Sludge. So check it out.
Yeah, all right, thank you, Sludge. Great job.
Let's take our final break. And then when we come back, I want to talk a little bit About this incredible story having to do with the right wing's reaction to an AllState CEO and what he had to say about the terror attack in New Orleans. We'll be right back.
All right, guys, let's go to Super Chat first now. Rage Rockford now says, committed to Israel's defense, but not committed to the defense/safety of people altogether, referring to Blinken. That's 100% true. I mean, if Antony Blinken said he was looking out for all human beings equally, that would be the biggest lie I have ever heard in my life. His job as Secretary of State, same job that Mark Rubio will have, is look out for Israeli lives first and foremost, and then like priority number 1,000 is any other human being, including Americans. Friendly Shark says, thanks, Cenk, for emphasizing the economy. Wokeness seems like an online thing. Most of the normies I talk to who aren't on X don't know much about wokeness. And I believe the ones who do talk about it wouldn't care if the government was working for them. Oh, totally. You can call it mankind, people kind. You could call it this, that, the other thing. As long as they delivered for you economically, you'd win easily, right? But the Democrats rather deliver for their donors and their voters. That is the #1 cancer. And even any kind of fights I've had with any other portion of the left, I say it every single time and I'll say it again now. They are not the biggest problem at all. The #1 problem is the establishment and the overwhelming corruption, okay? Because they never deliver for the average American. Tony Squires says, been a member for over 10 years. Today's my daughter's 4th birthday. Would love a shout out to my little insurrectionist baby. Okay, love it. Happy birthday to the younger Squires. And Tony, thank you for writing in and for being a member.
Happy birthday.
Yeah, happy birthday. Ryan L says, Cenk, not sure if you caught Vinny's sucker punch to you on Piers when he said you ran scared. I don't know why you'd give that snake so much grace. So I'd be super surprised if he meant that towards me. I didn't catch it, no, Ryan, but I'll see if I can go back and look for it. But I'd be really surprised because Vinny doesn't usually punch you from the back. He usually punches you in the face.
Yeah. I watched the whole thing and I missed that too if it did happen. So interesting.
Yeah. And Vinny and I have punched each other plenty of times, right? And we've also agreed now a number of times. But guys, the reason I read that mainly is not for over that miscommunication. It's because I want you to understand when I say there are right-wing populists, I don't mean that those people agree with everything we believe in. They agree with some of the things that we agree with. Anti-corruption, even if they're misdirected on who to vote for on that, right? Anti-war, paid family leave, cutting the Pentagon, et cetera, et cetera. But on a ton of other issues, including most importantly, social issues, we have enormous disagreements, enormous. It doesn't mean because they are right-wing populists that means that they agree with us 100%. I just want to make sure that you all understand that.
Can I just say one thing about Vinny? I didn't expect this the one time that I was on the PBD podcast, but Vinny 1,000,000% had my back as I was engaging in a debate with Adam, who's also on that show in regard to Israel. And sometimes you'll come across some on the right wing who are, they're more isolationists, and that's why they want to just stop being involved in what Israel is doing. But that's not the case when it comes to Vinny. You can tell that he's very much bothered by the way Israel is prosecuting this war. So I give him a lot of credit for that because I think he's right on that issue.
Yeah, so Vinny wants to arrest Dr. Fauci, and my reaction to that was, oh no, right?
Crazy, yeah.
And Patrick Bet-David wants to cut Social Security. No, right? So, but yeah, Vinny agrees with us on Israel, and that's a huge agreement, and not. Back on TRT, Cenk and Anna with you guys, but also Fat Satter gifted 20 Young Turks memberships. So we're about to say 10, I think he did 10 more. You're awesome, brother. We appreciate you. Casper, what's next?
For some reason, Corporate CEOs think we want to hear from them when it comes to tragic events or a message about the holidays, when in reality, we don't want to hear from them at all. But the reaction from the right in regard to this following message is fascinating, and we should break it down.
Join AllState working in local communities all across America to amplify the positive, increase trust, and accept people's imperfections and differences. Together, we win.
That was AllState CEO Tom Wilson, who has managed to infuriate some on the right over a message that he put out during the Super Bowl, or not, I'm sorry, the Sugar Bowl in New Orleans this year. So why don't we include a little more context, and then we'll try to figure out why people are so upset with him.
Welcome to the AllState Sugar Bowl. Wednesday, tragedy struck the New Orleans community. Our prayers are with the victims and their families. We also need to be stronger together by overcoming an addiction to divisiveness and negativity. Join AllState working in local communities all across America to amplify the positive, increase trust, and accept people's imperfections and differences. Together, we win.
Look, before we get to the right wing and their criticism, I want to discuss this with you, Cenk, okay? Person to person, one-on-one. I don't know why he felt the need to do this, because no one cares what you have to say about this matter at all, okay? What are you gonna do to lower our insurance prices because they're astronomical right now? Unless you're addressing that, I don't really care to hear from Tom Wilson. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, they must have been the sponsor of the Sugar Bowl, so that's why they took the opportunity to talk. And so they probably viewed it as an ad that brings people together, but they didn't realize that after a terrorist attack, talking about divisiveness, et cetera, is probably not the right way to go. Like, I appreciate that he was trying to cool the temperature, and so I don't want to get on him for trying to do that when I think he had the right intent. But let's also be clear that the point of that video was just so that more people will talk about AllState. And well, oops, mission accomplished. Okay, right?
True, yeah, mission accomplished.
And you'll get to the right-wing critique. And in this case, they're way too heated as usual over relatively benign comments. But I understand where they're coming from. It's not out of left field.
Okay, so before we get to the first example of a right-winger who's upset with this message, I should have looked this up beforehand. I just didn't care enough to do so. I'm being totally honest with the audience. What is the Sugar Bowl? What happens in the Sugar Bowl? Is it more interesting and delicious compared to the Super Bowl?
No, the Sugar Bowl is one of the many bowls that college football has. So now it gets more intricate and boring, so I'll skip all the details.
Thank God, thank you.
The bottom line now is that it's part of the college playoffs, so it was a really important game. And so, and everybody was looking forward to the game, and then it got delayed because of the terrorist attack, and then they come out and do this statement, and then everybody wanted the game to come back on, and it did. And
okay.
It got just delayed a little bit.
Okay, we're moving on. Let's start with Outkick's Clay Travis, who had this to say about CEO Tom Wilson's message.
The idiot CEO of AllState, Tom Wilson. Now, I understand AllState, like all of companies, has a variety of employees of a variety of different backgrounds. But if you all care about anything at all, you should fire this moron. Because before the Sugar Bowl started, this moron, Tom Wilson, he said that we had to combat divisiveness and negativity and acknowledge our imperfections. And he said that after an ISIS terror attack on Bourbon Street that killed 14 people. Nobody's got to apologize for divisiveness or negativity or imperfection. It wasn't imperfection that caused this terror attack. It was hate, and it was evil, and it should be condemned utterly.
I mean, I agree with pretty much everything he said. I thought he was going to devolve into Muslims are evil and, the Islamophobic garbage that I do not agree with. But everything he said there, I mean, I don't really take any issue with it. I mean, ironically, he's responding to Tom Wilson's message with, I guess you could say, divisiveness, but he's right. I mean, the Wilson's message didn't make any sense in this context at all. It seemed like he wanted to put some like lectury, like feel good message out there, but it did not go along with the incident that he's referencing.
Yeah, the reason why, like, I'm not at all being harsh about it is twofold. One, I think he had good intent. I think what they were trying to say is, don't hate Muslims after this. It's just one rando dude, right? Maybe you hate the terrorism, but don't hate the individuals. And all Muslims didn't do it. But he can't say that, right? Because that's too on the point, on the nose. So he chose to say it in a way that didn't make any sense, because acknowledging our imperfections. Why did we get bombed because of our imperfections? No, that had nothing to do with it, right? It was a deranged guy. And by the way, he's absolutely right. It has nothing to do with Muslims. If you're saying, no way, it's Muslims that are all of them are responsible. Well, a right winger did the terrorist act in Las Vegas that blew up the Tesla Cybertruck. Huge Trump fan. Are all right wingers responsible? Should they all apologize on behalf of the entire right wing? Of course not. And that guy doesn't represent the entire right wing. This guy doesn't represent all Muslims. Obviously, they both have significant mental problems. But the way that he said it is a tiny bit weird, right? Because one, imperfections, and then the talk of divisiveness and negativity, but that didn't lead to the bombing. It's what you want to prevent after the bombing, right? So that's why it comes across as awkward. But I don't agree with Clay Travis there when he says he should be fired.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, fire him over this. Like a slightly awkward way of phrasing something that had generally good intent. No, you don't fire him over that. That's crazy. Look, guys, the problem with the right wing at this point, and when they do stuff like this, is that ironically, they're doing cancel culture. They're like, oh, now we're in charge. We want to fire everybody. Fire anyone who disagrees with it. Oh, you said divisive when you shouldn't have said divisive? Fire, cancel them. And they're like, okay, now they're like, cancel AllState and go to other insurance companies. Guys, stop it. This is silly, utterly silly, and it's definitely cancel culture.
I mean, if the rates are better at a different insurance company, then go for it. But to do it over this message,
we have no idea.
We have no idea. Yeah, exactly. But to do it over this message is, I think, a little ridiculous. So Charlie Kirk is another one of these right wingers who did not like what Wilson had to say, writing, a jihadist killed and maimed dozens of innocent Americans in a hate-fueled rampage. And the CEO of AllState thinks Americans watching the Sugar Bowl need a lecture from him on overcoming an addiction to divisiveness and negativity. Absolutely not. Yeah, I think what triggered some folks, and I can understand why, is the use of the word addiction in this context, like kind of spitting in the face of Americans and criticizing them for having an addiction to divisiveness, when I don't think Americans have an addiction to divisiveness. And to repeat the point again, I don't think what happened in New Orleans is an example of someone who's doing something because of a culture of divisiveness that we have in America. So I just, look, I'm not as active on social media these days, so I might be unaware of something that you're noticing, Cenk. So I am curious, because I do remember the pre-Trump era, during the tail end of the Obama administration, when there were a lot of terrorist attacks carried out by, extremists. And the reaction from the right wing, generally speaking, was Islamophobic. Like there was a lot of Islamophobic garbage out there during that time, but I'm not noticing the same cultural phenomena today. Have you noticed a similar thing kind of reemerging as a result of what happened in New Orleans?
You're pointing out a really interesting phenomenon, because do I see some of it? Of course, right? You go on X and you're going to say, oh, all you Muslims did it, blah, 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 right? But I think you're right. And this is really anecdotal, so take it with a grain of salt. But I've seen less Islamophobia these days than I did in the past, for whatever it's worth. And tons of right wingers follow me. So if there was more, I presumably would have seen it more. But it comes with a giant but, which is that it's been redirected towards immigrants in large. And so that's why the AllState guys thing is really could be directed at Trump and what he said after the incident. And that might be why the right wing caught extra feelings over it, because the bombing itself had nothing to do with an addiction to divisiveness. But right afterwards, Trump came out and said, "Oh, it's the immigrants coming across the border," when this guy's a native-born American, born and raised in Texas, right?
Right.
So Trump just made that up, and why? Because he wants to drive hatred and divisiveness towards immigrants.
Yeah.
And so keep it real.
And as a reminder, so the man that we're talking about here, who carried out this terror attack in New Orleans, did plant 2 separate active bombs that luckily the authorities found and dealt with without incident. But after he had done that, he ran his truck through a crowd of people, effectively killing 14 and injuring dozens of others. And so, in response to, again, AllState CEO Wilson's message, Brett Favre had an interesting take. He said, "I heard there was no televised national anthem for Sugar Bowl yesterday. Instead, a DEI message by AllState CEO, woke is a joke." Okay, I get that now DEI is like the label that some are slapping onto everything, even when it makes no sense. But if we're gonna be critical of Wilson's message because it doesn't really apply to the terror attack in New Orleans, let's be critical of Brett Favre for slapping the DEI label on a story that has nothing to do with DEI. In fact, according to a fact check by Newsweek, before the game, the national anthem was in fact played, as is customary at US sporting events. And there was also a moment of silence observed. However, neither of those, 2 events were broadcasted on ESPN. An ESPN source told Newsweek that SportsCenter interviewed former NFL quarterback Tim Tebow before cutting to a commercial break as the moment of silence began. Once the broadcast resumed after the break, it was in the middle of the national anthem, and ESPN chose not to broadcast that at that point, as it would have been awkward, the source said. So the AllState clip was not played in lieu of the national anthem or in lieu of a moment of silence. AllState, by the way, did end up taking the video down from X. It is still available on YouTube though. And the company clarified the sentiment that Wilson was at least attempting to make, according to them. To be clear, AllState CEO Tom Wilson unequivocally condemns this heinous act of terrorism and violence in all forms. "We stand with the families of the victims, their loved ones, and the community of New Orleans. The reference to overcoming divisiveness and negativity reflects a broader commitment to fostering trust and positivity in communities across the nation." Jane.
Yeah. So look, right-wing populists, you got to get better at this, right? Like the constant spreading of lies and misinformation and the right wing falling for it every time is so annoying. So Brett Favre says there was no national anthem. Everybody instantly believes it. Nobody double checks. Nobody actually bothers to see if it's true or not true. Trump says that it was an immigrant that crossed the border recently. Nobody bothers to check. Not remotely true, just totally made up. Now, to be fair, not totally made up. Fox News said the car had crossed the border recently. What they didn't check was that it was a rental and the guy lived in Texas his whole life, okay? So, but Fox News, to their credit, actually came back and corrected that error. Trump did not, he doubled down. And tons of right-wingers are doubling down and calling him an immigrant, et cetera, when he's not. And Brett Favre, of course, goes after woke, is because he's like a really ideological right winger? No, he's a guy who got caught redirecting money that was supposed to go to the government, money that was supposed to go to the poor, into his own pocket and to his own interests. So he's kind of a crook who decided, oh, the crooks are in the Republican Party, so let me go hide out there, and that way I'll get to be above the law. So I got no interest in that crook Brett Favre and what he thinks. And so, and by the way, brother, try not throwing interceptions. How about that?
Totally.
Okay. Anyways.
Agreed.
So
is he still in the NFL?
No. He retired after throwing approximately 2.5 million interceptions and claiming to be a great quarterback. Okay.
Right.
All right. One last thing on the actual terrorist act. So no one does more damage to Muslims in America and across the world than these a-hole terrorists. The worst of the worst, right? So you go and kill all those poor innocent people, and for what? What, you think you're gonna win the war against America? You dumbass, you ridiculous, like homicidal maniac. And so what does it do in reality? Does it like terrorize Americans? No, we terrorize ourselves so much with mass shootings that these things are barely a blip, right? All it does is it terrorizes Muslim Americans because it makes everyone hate us. Like, it's the most anti-Muslim thing you could possibly do, to do a terrorist attack inside the US if you call yourself Muslim. And you get other Muslims killed, you get randomly Hindus killed who are wearing anything on their head, right? And you get more and more people killed, let alone the poor innocent people that you murdered, right? So it's just the dumbest strategy in the world. And I know they're all mentally deranged, but like his point was, oh my God, America's killing innocent Muslims abroad. And so I will combat that by killing innocent Americans here. How does that combat it? It doesn't combat it at all. It just has more innocent people die. So I loathe these terrorists, but there's a way to fight back against them without lying and without being weirdly discriminatory.
Yeah, totally agree. All right, the bonus episode is gonna be super lit, guys, super lit. Okay, we're gonna talk about this incredible report about the algorithms that are basically leading to landlords price gouging you. And then my favorite story, Matt Gaetz gets advice from George Santos on makeup. Don't miss it, tyt.com/join, and we'll see you there.
I now know the two teams that are in the Super Bowl.